All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third episode of The Art of Things. My name is Frédéric Desbiens, and I'm Program Manager for IoT and Edge Computing at the Eclipse Foundation. And with me today, three fantastic panelists that will help us discuss the findings of our commercial IoT and Edge Adoption Survey, the 2021 edition that we just released. So let's start with a round of introductions. So let's start with you, Jason.
Yeah, hey, so thanks for having me. So I work for a company called ZEDEDA. I lead our ecosystem effort. So that's both in the commercial sense, but also I do a lot with open source. Obviously, we've been collaborating with Eclipse Foundation recently on Edge. And I sit on the board as the chair for the Linux Foundation's LF Edge project. And we're always looking for ways to bridge gaps across the community. So definitely interested in talking about this topic. My motto is, if it's fuzzy, I'm on it. I've been, IoT has been super fuzzy for many years, and now Edge is the hot topic, and among others. And I've been looking at this space since 2014. So definitely have watched the changes over the years. So always interested in talking about this topic.
All right, thank you, Jason. Next is Rob.
Hey, everybody, Rob Tiffany. So I'm the head of IoT strategy at Ericsson. We're that company that makes that 5G stuff that you keep hearing about to make your cat videos go faster on your cell phone. Had the pleasure of building lots of big IoT systems at Microsoft and Hitachi. Definitely been in the space probably way too long. It's definitely been an interesting ride, having a front row seat at this mega trend. Happy to be here.
All right, and last but not least is Arlen.
Hello, everybody. Arlen Nipper. I'm the CTO for Cirrus Link Solutions. I've been doing IIoT for 43 years. We used to call it SCADA. We used to call it DCS. We used to call it, remote data acquisition. Now we've given it yet another name. So we'll see how that goes. One of the involvements that I've had in this whole area from Edge and open source is that I was lucky enough to work with Andy Stanford Clark with IBM, and Andy and I were the co-inventors of MQTT. And I think MQTT is a good example, again, with the PAHO project on Eclipse, on how open source technology literally has gone viral. I mean, MQTT has become the de facto messaging transport for IoT, and now this survey, we're going to see how that plan lays into the survey results today. So happy to be here and discuss it.
Excellent. And just to give a bit of context, so if anyone in the audience is not familiar with the survey itself, so this is a survey that we run every spring going forward at the Eclipse Foundation. So in this case, we kept it open from mid-January to mid-March, and then took some time to, analyze the findings and obviously build this report that you can download on the Eclipse IoT website. So let's get straight to things. So the first takeaway that we have in the survey, at least the people that took the time to answer it, is that 47% are deploying IoT solutions today, and 39% will be deploying IoT solutions in the next 24 months. So it seems that, pandemic or not, people are doubling down on IoT and thinking about doing more things around this. So was this surprising to you, Jason?
I mean, no. I mean, I think we should kind of look at what is IoT in the bigger picture, because I think there's a lot of people that kind of look at, I did something with mobile devices and that's IoT. There's a lot of IoT washing. So that's the first thing to do, is just to kind of back up a bit. But in terms of last year, for sure, anything revolving around remote monitoring, kind of keep me out of the physical world, we saw investments holding, if not accelerating, last year for sure. But yeah, I mean, I welcome other thoughts, but I think we should also talk about, just when people look at IoT, what are they actually doing versus like the broad term. But I definitely think it's picking up.
Yeah, we may have a semantics problem somehow there about defining things. And we had the specific IoT definition in the survey, but maybe we should beef it up a bit to ensure that people actually know what they are answering about.
It's funny when we started this way back in 2014, looking at it, when IoT became like the hot buzzword, we had a lot of customers coming to us saying, "Hey, I want to buy some IoT." Oh, really? Yeah. What color would you like?
Indeed, which size?
One thing, and so there's so many things involved and whatnot that obviously that some of the semantics matter. But anyway,
that makes sense. So Rob and Arlen, anything to say about this one? Was it surprising, or are you like Jason saying, "Hey, this is in line with what we see"?
Yeah, it's chugging along. I think hiding inside there is, what's actually being built, how much of it, if these bar charts are referring to organizations, corporations who are deploying stuff, like Jason said, people have been kind of, once that IoT, geek out mega trend started happening, not quite a decade ago, people jumped in. I don't know what is an IoT. I think lots of people are building all kinds of solutions, whether they call it IoT or not. And Jason's right, especially COVID, it's all about making remote things seem local, kind of like what we're doing now, right? We're doing this webcast like this. And so IoT is a great way to do that, remote monitoring, remote control, where people can be somewhere else. So yeah, I don't think it's that surprising.
And I agree too, Frédéric. If you look, our background came from oil and gas, so probably 85-90% was in oil and gas until the last 18 months, and now oil and gas is less than 40% of our business. It went into manufacturing, it went into water, wastewater, pharma, food, beverage. So we're seeing adoption, from our standpoint with the activity, it's fourfold over what it was even 12 months ago.
So then I'm really looking forward to our developer survey in the fall to see the progress over the year, and looking forward to discuss that with each of you, obviously.
Yeah. The flip side, I would say, real quick,
yes.
sorry, is I think there's a lot of people that are doing quote unquote IoT that don't really think about it as IoT anymore. It's just part of their regular business practice. Like, how often do we say, "Hey, I'm going to do some e-commerce today"?
Right.
Yeah, that's so 90s, isn't it?
It's just part of what you do. So usually technologies start with a buzz and then they start to kind of fade away and just become part of the tool set. And people use it as it makes sense. And so I think we're kind of turning the corner. I mean, I would agree with Rob, but we're chugging along. But at the same time, another way to look at it is it's just kind of part of the tool set now.
Well, that reminds me, they say the most pervasive technologies are those that disappear.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. They became part of our lives. Let's move forward with our takeaway number 2 then, about edge computing. So not only this year we asked about IoT, but we integrated edge in our set of questions. And it seems that edge computing itself, which we defined as moving compute and storage closer to the source of the data in the survey, is gaining significant traction there. So there are at least 38% of our respondents that told us that, they are doing it today, and another 46% that they are planning to start in the next 24 months. So, Rob, is this in line with what you see in the market?
Yeah, edge computing is yet another thing that's been around for a long time, and now it's just got some hype, spotlight put on it. A lot of times it's just practical stuff. If you think about, if I just think of a manufacturing perspective of things, we were always doing something like that a long time ago because you had to be close to the machines, the PLCs or whatever to connect to it. And so the idea of edge gateways or field gateways or all kinds of different names, SCADA systems, whatever, wasn't new, but yeah, putting a lot of that stuff into a category and saying, hey, it's edge, it's not fog, it's not whatever you called it before, we're going to call it edge computing. It's just a different location. It's closer to the data. It's good for latency. It's good for data governance and some security. Like, folks who maybe have a nuclear power plant and they don't want to connect it to the internet. That's probably a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, and when we say edge computing has been around for a while, I completely agree with that. I did a presentation where I was describing the software architecture for the Apollo missions in the 60s, and they had made frames straight at the antennas that were crunching data and sending that back to Houston to another mainframe that was powering the consoles in the mission control. So, and I suppose, Arlen, given your background and long experience in industrial automation in specific verticals, that you see that emerging as well in industrial automation, right?
Well, yeah. Again, to everybody's point, I think we've given it a name, but if we look at edge computing, I was doing that for Coke Oil in 1978. If you want to look at it that way, so we've given it a name. I think one of the things we've maybe exposed it more to IT, where typically before it was a control engineer, he wrote a specific program to do something. This is my data. So maybe it's the fact that we're exposing this more to the enterprise, more to IT, so that now we've given it a name and a category, and now perhaps we can track it. But I agree that we're seeing more and more compute functions move to the edge from a central location.
And Jason, you're busy at ZEDEDA working on cutting edge technologies there. So, what makes the no pun intended? I mean, I'm not an English speaker, right? So anyway, but now, what makes what we call now edge computing different from the previous incarnations of the concept?
Yeah. So I'll take on that one. I'll start with a little bit of a contrarian view. So I don't believe process control, is edge computing. Closed loop PLC systems. I mean, that's been that way for a long time. For sure. I think there's definitely edge washing, just like we talked about. There was IoT washing. Everything's edge. Basically, what's different to me is edge computing inherently comprehends centralized resources as well. It's a symbiotic relationship between edge and call it the cloud, or you mentioned the Apple example where it's kind of crunching and then feeding upstream. If there isn't that centralized, decentralized component of edge computing, it's a legacy on-prem app. It's been done for a long time. You never comprehended the back end and how you work together. So, I mean, that's like the topic of edge native, as one of the working groups. And, we're talking more about that as edge native apps that don't comprehend the cloud or they have to comprehend the cloud. Otherwise, they're just legacy apps. So I think that's what's different. It's this notion of taking resources and moving them across this continuum from centralized resources where you have massively scalable compute out to the edges of various degrees, to where you have the responsiveness and the ability to cut down on bandwidth consumption and maintain security and privacy, all the reasons that we know for edge. But that's what I think is different, is that consideration of the continuum.
Yeah, indeed. And I certainly agree with that when you consider the various planes that they are in a typical edge computing architecture. The fact that you can deploy the components for those various planes at many different places and physical locations across this continuum is what makes edge so flexible and relevant.
Yeah, I think a good question for the next round is which edge. I know there's some questions we're going to talk about, kind of the apps, like what are the killer apps and all that. But I find it surprising, to be honest, that 38% are deploying edge computing solutions today in more of a what's new sense versus what has been done initially. Of course, probably the most pervasive edge computing, by the current terms, I would argue, are things like caching for video, like streaming your video like locally, at a small set or at a cell tower, like regional data center, so that you can watch your cat videos faster, because cat videos is the reason for it.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, that's Rob said. So
yeah.
That's probably the most pervasive today. There's a lot of really cool stuff coming. I mean, don't get me wrong, like we see a lot of opportunity, but I think this is also one of those same questions where people get confused over, are you really doing edge in what sense, and then where are you doing it is also really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. And at the same time, there could be some self-selection bias in the sense that we at the Eclipse Foundation are active in edge computing, and part of our community is. So maybe we are missing some layers of the industry there. And obviously, we are always looking for opportunities to, grow the number of respondents and more accurately reflect the whole market. And I'm quite sure over the years we'll be successful at that. But yeah, I think certainly what you say is right there, Jason. So let's advance now to the next takeaway. So the deployment timelines for projects. So essentially, what we learned from our roughly 200 respondents in this survey is that 44% of them said that the typical time frame for their IoT and edge projects is less than 12 months. And then an additional maybe 20% are talking about 13 to 24 months. And so it seems, at least in the data set that we've got, that longer term projects are a bit scarcer. So what do you make of this, Arlen?
Well, I think you're talking greenfield versus brownfield. I mean, we have a lot of greenfield customers where, they can target a particular problem. And, we always say with IIoT, the worst thing you can do is try to eat the elephant. The best thing is find a very small problem and let's go fix it. And hopefully, with the Eclipse Foundation and a lot of the tools, we've got the ability to do that. And 12 months seems reasonable for that. But on larger where, sorry guys, we live in a brownfield world. We're going to live in a brownfield world for the next decade or more. And so those projects are going to take more time because you've got to integrate in with the existing brownfield equipment. And I think that's always the challenge on any brownfield IoT project. So I would agree, greenfield, 12 months probably reasonable. As you look out and more, and like you said, larger infrastructures, more mature industries, manufacturing, oil and gas, then that integration time is going to take a bit longer.
So is the expectation there is that as the industry matures, we'll see more and more longer term projects?
Well, I think you're going to see two things. One is you are going to see more and more longer term projects, but equipment manufacturers are now starting to come out with native IoT-enabled equipment. So you're kind of a catch-22 there, where you may in the future be able to replace your PLC with something that can actually talk to the world securely, right? But there are PLCs out there that have been out there for 25, 30 years. We've got to learn to integrate with those as well.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, Rob, anything to add about this?
I think the word "it depends." I hate that word, but it just if it's a narrow scope thing, yeah, maybe it's going to happen in another 12. When things got really hot in IoT, again 5, 7, 8, whatever years ago. Obviously, lots of big players when the biggest companies were jumping into this, and there was this notion of literally, this is a board level decision to do IoT, and we're going to boil the ocean and transform your company. And the numbers have been really disappointing, actually. When you talk about how long it's taking, most of them are taking way too long, and maybe they're trying to do too much. Tons of stats are showing over 75% of all IoT projects are failing at the POC stage, and they're never making it to production. I think too much time is being spent on non-valuable activities like programming devices and things like that. That's not what the customer asked for. They're looking for some kind of outcome, an app, an analytics, or whatever. But the reality is all the time is being spent doing a lot of menial tasks, which is frustrating to customers. I know they're expecting returns more quickly, and so a lot of projects are failing. So to Arlen's point, though, as we move forward, and clearly, all the crazy numbers that all the analysts and big companies projected back in 2010 about us being at 50 billion connected IoT devices, we're barely at a fraction of that. We're never going to get there until machines, when all that stuff, compute, networking, storage, all that stuff's baked into machines at time of manufacturing. I think that's when we'll hit an acceleration point.
Yeah, I would say that, I agree with the greenfield versus brownfield. When it's less than 12 months, I think a big component of that too is that there was actually a defined business case and use case up front. Rob kind of touched on that, versus someone that thinks it's cool to tinker with these technologies and then it's a solution looking for a problem. Those are the ones that tend to drag on, forever. Brownfield too, it's, so if it's greenfield and it's fairly constrained and there's a good business case, yeah, we see projects happening, fairly quickly. It's a normal product development cycle to a certain extent. And then it certainly helps when you have connectivity and the basics sort of built in over time, as Rob said. But brownfield, it's just not, well, kind of all across the board, but especially brownfield. It's not just about the technology integration. It's also about, OT, IT, LOB, stakeholder complexity. I call it the dirty laundry syndrome, where people are afraid of getting exposed. Not my job. I don't have the skills. That scares me. All that kind of stuff is very challenging with these types of technologies. It's actually the people parts as hard or harder than the technology part.
So the project is longer because you have to deal with politics, if I simplify things a bit.
Politics, just disagreement over, what you're trying to do, fear. That's actually what drags this along. Who owns it? What's my business priority? I know I want to do this. I could save 20% on XYZ, but I got other fires to fight. That's a big reason we see delays happening is more organizational and politically than it is technology.
All right, that makes sense. Now going forward with the next takeaway from the survey, trends in investment. So essentially, what we learned is that 54% of our respondents will spend less than 100K in US dollars in the next fiscal year, whereas 30% will spend between 100K and 1 million, and over 1 million, we have 16% of respondents. Now, one thing that people are arguing about is, the relative meaning of those budgets. IoT is often associated with cheap sensors and microcontrollers, things like that, things that don't necessarily cost a lot to deploy. And so in theory, you can deploy at scale in fairly small budgets, relatively speaking. But what's your interpretation of the numbers here, Jason?
Well, I definitely see a lot more smaller to medium-sized projects. So the 84%, the bulk being, under $1 million, I see that as pretty common. Yes, well, there's a variety of different cost points of sensors. A lot of them. The whole point with IoT is it's embedded computing hitting scale, and you've got lower cost sensors, but there's also a lot of systems out there that are not so low cost. But a successful IoT project, it also has to include some sort of back end. Initially, maybe it's just for monitoring, but then also eventually you want to be doing analytics. And so that's where the cost is, the investment is. Deployment of things costs money. So while the sensors can be inexpensive, the infrastructure that supports it and the deployment of it is not so much. And so that's where the costs start adding up.
And obviously there's a bandwidth factor to everything or nearly everything that you do in IoT and Edge as well that you need to take into account. And obviously one improvement that we are planning to make is try to be a bit more granular in future editions of the survey, where we will distinguish at least, what part of this is the hardware, what part of this is the software, and what part is support, like the bandwidth costs and things like that.
There's also a time factor too. So, a lot of folks start with very cheap edge, easy cloud, I'll say. Mm-hmm. Very, very inexpensive devices, Raspberry Pi or whatever, and I'm going to sign up for a public cloud account and go to town. and it's easy to do, but we've done studies in the past where you take different workloads. So whether it's computer vision drives a lot of bandwidth, it's out in the oil rig, so you're using satellite connectivity or something, so it costs a lot of money for that bandwidth. Various different parameters. While it seems like the cost is X up front, once you start adding up all of the costs of bandwidth and support and everything over a period of time, it's way different. And it's also part of the driver for edge computing. We've looked at where it seems like it makes a lot of sense up front to pump all your data to the cloud. It's in a central location, whatever. And for the first year or so, it looks like good in terms of cost. But then we've found like 5 years out, it's actually multiple times more expensive if you don't pre-process that data. So I think there's some interesting stuff to tease out over time, not only on the initial investment, but how do people see it progressing over time? Because that's another unknown, I think, to a lot of people.
Indeed. So, Arlen, Rob, what is your take on this one?
Well, I agree in that, I think to that point, let's go grab a Raspberry Pi, let's roll it out there. Whoa, wait a minute. So yeah, you're right. I mean, Raspberry Pi comes with Node-RED. It's got MQTT on it. I'm happy, right? But no, I think we're getting more mature. Now we're wanting standards. We're wanting to say, okay, you put those devices out there, but let's get some standards around that. That's one of the things that we're working on in Eclipse is in the Sparkplug working group is trying to get some consensus around, okay, I'm going to deploy these devices. Some of them may be very inexpensive. They may be $100 LoRaWAN sensor. But if you guys have looked at LoRaWAN, it's the Wild West in that every single device has their own proprietary way of sending data. And that's not going to scale until we get some more expensive equipment out there to pre-process that. So I think, again, you've got the scale of we started very quickly. We saw the art of the possible, and now we're getting that built into more and more expensive, high-quality industrial equipment going forward.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rob.
What he said. Yeah, all this stuff under $1 million is just tinkering. I mean, in my experience, despite what we may want, IoT are consulting gigs. They're projects, and any kind of IT project, good luck getting anything like writing one line of code for under $100,000, right? And so this 100,000 to $1 million is a lot of tinkering, but no doubt about it. When you're talking about big, giant deployments and big data and analytics and machine learning, it blows through $1 million and way beyond really quickly. That's where all the money gets eaten up. And yeah, you know what? Everybody's got their hand out in IoT. Depending on what you think of IoT, you can think of it just as basic plumbing, but if you want to bolt on analytics, it's like from end to end, it's hardware, and hardware is hard, and embedded developers and maybe some short range network and maybe an edge gateway thingy doing some compute there. And then maybe a long range network, and you got to pay for that. God forbid, if it's cellular, it might actually cost some real money. And then back in cloud platforms or whatever, and munching all that data, organizing it like digital twins and all that analytics outcomes, the dollars add up really fast.
Yeah, remember, those icons that they put on all those cloud architectures, behind each icon is a little cash register.
That's right. Cha-ching.
That's such a interesting image, right? I will be scared to look under a product going forward, and see all of those logos. Then,
yeah, I've joked for a while like that. We've been in pie in the sky mode, so Raspberry Pi and a public cloud, get started. But then pie in the sky also because you're coming up with pie in the sky ideas. And then a lot of platforms are giving you IoT gateway drugs, trying to get you hooked on their platform, and you get more data in, and then you're locked in. And so it's been interesting. I think we've all been touching on it. We'll continue to touch on it. I've also said for a while, you have to democratize the South to monetize the North. We've got to make connectivity just part of it, and then you focus on where it really matters.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, Certainly makes a lot of sense to me. All right, in the interest of time, let's go forward to our next finding, which is where the decisions about IoT and edge investments are made. And there we saw a fairly significant change in between our 2019 edition of this survey and the 2021 edition, in the sense that in 2019, 80% of respondents told us decisions are made by the C-suite, whereas in the 2021 edition, 35% of respondents told us decisions are made by the C-suite. Rob, is this surprising to you? Is the C-suite getting excited about it, or are they getting involved because the others in the organization cannot sort it out? What's happening there?
I think the C-suite's been in charge the whole time, actually.
Okay.
Unless it's just tinkering around, and that's when IT is involved. But things like IoT and edge computing are components of larger mega trends. Stupid terms like digital transformation, maybe more important terms like Industry 4.0. But they underpin those things. And these are big mega trends. And these are absolutely being driven by the C-suite, across manufacturing and lots of other industries. And so it's not a surprise at all that the C-suite dominates these things.
And what do you see on your corner of the universe, Arlen?
Oh, it definitely is a C-suite decision. The problem is the C-suite can make that decision, but they don't know how to execute on it. And so, again, going back to our other discussion around cloud, there's so much stuff you can do, and that they get that sales pitch, right? They get excited. Hey, man, let's start our digital transformation, Industry 4.0, IIoT project. And then where do you start? How do you execute, right? And that leads to the kind of the all the failed projects, all the POCs that have failed, is because the executives made the decision, let's go. But I think going back to, we can't eat the elephant. Let's go solve a little problem first and get going. So yes, every discussion that we have with large IoT deployments does include the C-suite, but it's how well they integrate with their OT and IT folks that makes the project successful or not.
Yeah. Because I'm surprised to see like a high number of seeing IT being in the driver's seat. Just generically speaking, IT has been losing its power steadily for the last 2 decades. And so I don't see IT driving anything anymore. OT guys hate IT guys and vice versa. They're butting heads the whole time. I'm really surprised to see business units so low, to be honest with you.
I am too. And you're right. Unless OT becomes a significant part of that, those projects are going to fail.
Yep, it's true.
I think, yeah, I agree. So a couple things. So number one, if you look at the demographics, I think it was like 30% of it was C-suite or executive management respondents. One thing I've noticed over the years for this space in general is that everyone thinks they own it. So depending on who answers the question is what you're going to get the bias towards. The other observation I would have, I agree with the guys here as well, but an additional observation is, here's where it's really important to separate out IoT and edge. IoT, if it was only about IoT, I would very much expect OT and BU to be way higher, because they're the ones that make the decision there. It's tied into my operations. I'm getting data from the physical world. It's that kind of bleed up from things that have been done for a long time. Edge computing tends to be more of an IT conversation. I want to extend IT principles, cloud native, closer to the source. I'm the one that, pays for money going over wireless or, networks to the back end, whatever, more kind of IT principles. So I think it'd be very interesting to do a contrast between true IoT versus, true edge computing and see the differences. I think it would be a different swizzle.
And at the same time, I really find this interesting because the IT environment is pretty much data center / cloud-based. So that's homogeneous infrastructure that you drive at scale, that kind of stuff. Whereas the edge environment, in theory, is much much different from that. So is there a gap then between what IT folks are trying to push versus the reality of edge deployments?
I think there's a root cause that's happened here, though, Frederick. If you look at it, saying things like Azure Edge or Amazon Greengrass, well, what happened? That moved this supposedly secure compute platform down to the edge, and then IT thought, oh, I've got a container there, therefore I must write some code. And I think that's really been kind of turned into a train wreck in the fact that, IT were down there writing code down at the operational level, and that going back to, the more involvement of the OT and the business units.
It also really depends. Yeah, I agree, and it also really depends on the edge. So if you also look at the survey respondents, 40% were IT telco. So a third of them were C-suite, and 40% were IT telco. So in their minds, very likely when they're responding edge and I own it, they're talking about regional and access data centers. That is 100% IT. That's not necessarily operations. A service provider edge, telco edge, whatever semantics you subscribe to, it's IT. Meanwhile, if I'm on a factory floor, running compute for computer vision, doing some sort of quality control or whatever, safety and security, that's blurring the lines a lot more between OT and IT because it's closer to the actual process in the physical world. So the respondent type, their background is going to completely vary the answers.
Of course. All right. Let's now go to our next finding, which is the impact across the organization. So we asked specifically to our respondents to identify the number one place or the number one function in their organization where they felt that IoT and edge solutions would make an impact. And here it was only a single answer that was permitted, if I remember well. So product and service development came on the top, operations, research, but we see it's fairly tightly packed. So when we look at this, Arlen, does this reflect what you see in the work that you're doing?
Looking at it from the standpoint of operations, predictive maintenance, customer support or customer within that company, I would agree. I mean, these look pretty, the responses here look pretty typical on what we're seeing. Probably since we're more in IIoT, our kind of tilt would be towards operations, but definitely we're getting into it from food and beverage and pharmaceutical. It is product, service and development. So I would agree with these results at that point.
All right. Any other takes on this?
Yeah, I think it makes sense that they're all kind of neck and neck, across that. From my perspective, a lot of times it is just operations, manufacturing, definitely seeing an uptick in logistics and supply chain, utilizing kind of IoT-ish technologies and things like that.
Yeah, and asset tracking is obviously a common suspect there.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Their use cases are all over the place, and the one observation I have here is that it's kind of a combination of verticals, horizontal use cases, and groups. Like who's responsible. So I think it's a little mixed, but the fact that it's flat is indicative that that we're sort of, there's value across the board as long as you find the right use case.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay. Our next takeaway is about the importance of open source software. So we asked here, are you using or looking at, if you are not using currently, purely open source solutions, a mix of open source or proprietary, and then purely proprietary solutions? And 40% of respondents, nearly 40%, told us that they are looking at pure open source, and then 35% at a mix of open source and proprietary. So is this in line with what you see, Jason?
Yeah, I definitely think that we're seeing a lot more people jump on the open source train. And this was up a lot from last year, right?
Yes, we saw some progress from 2019. I don't remember the exact figures, but there was a definitive progression there.
Pretty considerable. So, I mean, the way I look at this, I mean, open source, you avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. There's a lot of people that are trying to reinvent stuff. There's a lot of people that think that they need to own the middle to succeed, but it costs an incredible amount of money to do that. The new way of succeeding with product development is you win by merit, not lock-in. You architect ecosystems into your offer, not like decide who to partner with after the fact to sell it. And the way you do that best is through open collaboration and create a network effect. And so I think people are starting to pick up on this. The last thing this world needs is another IoT platform. We've got way too many. We need more common foundations and interoperability, as we've been saying, and then the values around the wheel. So it definitely makes sense, for this to be picking up.
So could we say in a way that open source is winning? I
mean, I certainly think so. I mean, we clearly have a bias because we're very involved in the open source community.
Yeah. I thought you were so eloquent there with all the stuff coming out of your mouth. I really applaud that. Open source is not yet winning. They still have a long way to go. That's why you have such low numbers here. It's on the right track. Most people don't use open source. I don't know where the 26% thing comes from. Most big companies buy stuff from other big companies. You can't beat the sales forces coming at you from Microsoft and others. And that's how most decisions are made. It's great to see open source trending in the right direction, though. I think people, as Jason's talking about, maybe they are kind of starting to wake up to the realities that maybe they've been bamboozled or something like that, and they're getting locked into stuff. It's just going to take time. It's a process, but yeah, it looks like the numbers are trending in the right direction.
Well, I think people that think that they're using proprietary software are actually using open source indirectly, because those tools that they're using are often based on some of these types of technologies. So.
No, that's true. If you're using like Amazon IoT Core, Amazon's 100% built on open source stuff.
Yeah, so that's the difference. Yeah. The people that want the easy button and are okay, or at least haven't felt the pain yet of being locked in, are latching on to things that are offered by companies that got the memo that they should be not reinventing everything. Yeah. So the food chain's kind of coming down, but it's going to change.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like you said, with IoT Core, with Azure IoT Edge, things like that, where, when I was designing hardware, nobody ever said, Arlen, I want a single board computer. I have to have cellular, and I only want it to work with AT&T.
Especially not AT&T.
Right. But no, I want it to work with every, and we're seeing customers now realize that if they don't use these open source tools and standards, they've just hard coded themselves to a cloud provider, right? And so that gives us that decoupling that we need, so that, hey, I can go to this cloud provider for this particular service. This guy has another better service over here I can use for something else. So we can't be hard coding ourselves to any particular architecture if it's proprietary.
Yeah, you guys would be so proud of me coming from being a Microsoftie so long. I did a big presentation for Ericsson's research days where the whole presentation was how you can build every last bit of IoT stuff with open source. And people are like, what?
That record scratch here. Yeah. The key point here is, if you start with an open edge, and decouple yourself the moment data is created from any given backend, cloud or otherwise, then all permutations work from edge to cloud. If you latch on to one cloud, I mean, it's not to say that clouds are doing bad things, they're doing great stuff, but if you latch on to one, you're going to hate it once you start having to pay for the egress charges. Yeah. So you want to be in control of your destiny, because the multi-cloud strategy from the clouds is send me all your data, then you can pay me more money to send it anywhere you'd like.
Absolutely.
That's not good.
Yeah. You're so right. You know how this works, guys. When you're on a device, if you're going with one of the big cloud players or big platforms, the developer is writing to an SDK on the device or on an edge gateway or something like that, for Azure IoT Hub or ThingWorks or whatever, you pick it. Once you've written that SDK code, you've effectively locked yourself into that platform for the life of that device, that machine. God forbid it's some industrial machine that needs to work for decades and you're stuck with this cloud or whatever. So these guys are right. You got to rethink that, how we do that. And yeah, you absolutely, the minute you write code to these SDKs, you've locked yourself in.
And already in the conversation we have on this topic, there's been a few reasons why picking open source is a good choice that surfaced. So let's go to our next finding, because that's exactly what we asked next to the respondents of the survey. We asked them, what's your number one reason? Once again, they could only pick one to use open source. And the number one answer was the ability to customize code. Then there was the cost advantage, obviously, and third one was flexibility. So while the cost is certainly taken into account, it seems that people value more the capacity that they have to really tweak the hardware and software for a specific use case in order to deliver. So, any reaction to that, Rob?
I just think people are afraid to just say what they're thinking and having cost advantage be 90%. Seriously, come on. Enterprises, it's all about economics for sure. Yes, I'm sure, especially if it's within the Eclipse Foundation, depending on who you're talking to, you're going to get a different perspective. But people just doing commercial systems, they're not influencing or doing custom code. They're getting open source databases, open source message queues, you name it. They're not modifying code. They're grabbing that stuff and they're using it and wiring these things together to build solutions. And they love that it's all now good enough and sometimes really good. And they love that it's free. I know that sounds really horrible on this event here, but that's how I see most folks look at it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the one that's missing here is open source communities tend to be like informal sort of partner programs or kind of ecosystem efforts. And then also the big one is interoperability.
I was literally just getting ready to say that. That's the big, to me, that's kind of like, the elephant in the room that's not here.
Yeah. Open source is the modern way to drive standards. And so we're seeing, obviously with the work that the Sparkplug community is doing and stuff we're doing within LF-Edge, why did we contribute EvoS from ZEDEDA to LF-Edge? Is, we need kind of like an Android of the edge sort of operating system. And because the moment you pick like one OS in edge computing, you're wrong to everybody. So, how do we curate more universal options? But yeah, interoperability, I think is a big one that is missing, but otherwise, I mean, it makes sense. And I agree. It's there's more people using open source code for cost advantages than they are contributing to it, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a typical problem of open source communities wherever they are at Eclipse, LF-Edge, or even Apache. And at the same time, I had a feeling looking at this data that IoT and Edge projects are a bit different than the typical IT project, in the sense that you really need, especially if you operate on a battery, to cut the fat and not deploy features that you don't need and things like that. And that for that reason, to me, it made sense intuitively to see the ability to customize code as the number one reason there. But yeah, you are probably right that people are not celebrating the fact they are cheap, and certainly we will look forward to add interoperability as a factor in this question, so that next time we revisit the topic, we see maybe something a bit more representative of what you see all in your respective communities. Okay. The next finding was about the cloud, and specifically we asked, okay, you're deploying IoT and Edge solutions. This will connect to the cloud. So what is your preferred IoT cloud strategy there? So hybrid came first at 44%, multi-cloud came second at 35%. And then we see at the very last, only 20% of respondents told us, oh, I'm married exclusively to public cloud. I'm going all in there. So is this surprising to you, Arlen?
Well, it is a bit to me. Most of our enterprise customers, I would say, are in the, they're using the Azure Amazon infrastructure pretty heavily. But again, my other point was, I think they've realized that, oops, all of a sudden I've coded myself to one provider. This could be bad going forward. So I think we have a lot of them looking at private cloud and then moving some of that workload in, regardless of how they do that. So again, from just my customer base, I would say it was more towards hybrid and public. But yeah, I mean, that would be, again, those large enterprise customers.
And to me, it seemed natural that hybrid came first, since there's a lot of operational data that you want to keep inside your own organization, right? You don't want to put your industrial secrets in a public cloud where it could be, in theory, act more easily. Although, I mean, it all depends on the size of your organization and the skills of your IT people there. But are there? I mean, am I wrong in saying it that way?
I guess it's the definition of the hybrid. I mean, if you're talking about maintaining their on-prem historians, their Pi historian, things like that, then yes, I would agree 100% that they're going to maintain that and they're going to keep it on their local, and I would call it even on-prem hardware. And if that's the definition of a private cloud, then I would agree.
When I look at these numbers, they're not reflective, actually, of larger sets of surveys out there. I think that it looks more like what you'd like it to be. I mean, when I was designing Lumada Hitachi, it needed to be portable. It needed to run on-prem, any cloud, VMware, bare metal, whatever, because you want the customer to say, yeah, excellent, and so that kind of fits the hybrid multi-cloud, private cloud. But the overwhelming numbers we're seeing today, Azure IoT and AWS IoT Core completely dominating the industry.
And here, I think the answers we got are a bit different than from our developer survey, where we are much more granular and offer many more options that rather just discuss cloud. So maybe it's in the way that we define those things or didn't define them enough that produced those results. So certainly we'll have a closer look at it. In any case.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, I was about to just go back to you and see if you had anything to add on this.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, Rob mentioned there's a lot of people that start with public cloud, especially in IoT. I mean, I think edge computing obviously inherently has more of a hybrid nature if you're really doing edge computing. But I think people are confused as to which one means, for sure. I also think that when you say multi-cloud, does that mean that you're actually using multiple clouds, or you want to architect so that you can, even though you're using one up front? Because a lot of people just latch on to one preference and that's how they start. But I think, the core message that we've been talking about, and, Rob even made the point in the chat is think about how you're architecting today so that any one of these models works over time. We talk with a lot of, look at energy. In energy, renewables, cool, no problem. Cloud, kind of inherent. I got stuff all over the place. Demand response, that's cool. I'm turning on and off, building assets based on power draw. Substations, nope, I'm not going to touch the cloud. I mean, I think, Rob, you mentioned, it's going to be, you mentioned a nuclear plant, probably not going to willy-nilly connect up to the cloud. But the point being is, if you architect properly, you can work with any of these models based on the risk profile of use cases within your organization. There's not going to be one answer for any organization. It's going to be inherently a mix.
Yeah, indeed. or at least that reflects my own personal understanding.
Yeah.
So now going forward with the next takeaway, we asked our survey takers to rate the perceived importance to them of various components of IoT and edge solutions. And you see here the various the various answers. Obviously, the actual profile or demographics of the people that answers may have an impact there. But when you see this, Jason, any surprise in any of those categories?
No, I mean, it's funny. So this is definitely reflective of a bunch of folks that are working on the nuts and bolts of IoT, which, I mean, this is hard stuff. We talk about interoperability and all that. I've seen so many IoT architecture diagrams over the years with this massive backend and data lakes and hub and blah, 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 and this tiny little box at the bottom that says sensors and gateways.
It's that easy, yeah.
That means you've never done an actual IoT project, because that's hard.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what I love, those presentations, that all of these drawing, everything. And then there's this, and you raise your hand and say, well, how do I get that? Oh yeah, here. Oh, I forgot to draw that in. Little bubble OT. When in fact, we all know every one of these projects, that the OT bubble should be this big. And then finally, when you're ready, oh, here's a little bubble up here that's called cloud.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I mean, in the end, it's like we're remotely monitoring sensors and we are remotely controlling actuators. And we're going to apply some analytics in the middle to get value. User interfaces are great for sales presentations, and that's kind of reflective of the immaturity of IoT in the future to get to where we want to go, where it's tens of billions or trillions of devices. Everything will be fully automated, and it'll be silly to have user interfaces. All that stuff's going to be fully automated. People won't be looking and going, oh, I wonder what I should do here. But that's just where we are today.
All right. In the interest of time, since we are getting a bit short there, moving to the next takeaway. So we asked specifically about the workloads people are deploying at the edge. And here AI unsurprisingly came first. And then we have a fairly interesting mix. So when you see this, are you, I mean, is this reflective of what you see?
Generally, but I would mix video processing with AI, machine learning. Computer vision is hands down the killer app for edge.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so there could have been some cannibalizing, or anyway, maybe we should clarify the labels a bit for future editions there.
Yeah, AI is a broad topic, but it's certainly people that answered AI probably were thinking video analytics or computer vision.
And to me, when I saw those numbers, I felt that it simply shows how dynamic the edge market is, and that people are looking at it in really various ways, which was in line with our earlier takeaway that edge adoption is growing. So, do you see some of those categories that we see in the finding growing or shrinking in the future?
I don't know.
I mean, they're all important. I mean, the sensor fusion, the control logic, that's where a lot of our customer base is at. I would say if I just surveyed my customer base, artificial intelligence wouldn't be the top. It would probably be the sensor fusion and control logic. But that's the market that I'm in. But we see it across the board. And even now, we added the ability in Sparkplug to publish files, and that was largely driven by video clips, audio clips, still JPEG pictures. Again, back to this imaging and being able to publish that information around.
Okay, that makes sense. We are now nearly out of time, so instead of getting too quickly through the rest of the findings and all of that, let's focus rather on what each of you has to say to our listeners. So, what I will ask you, we are making recommendations in this report according to our interpretation at the foundation of the findings. Now, what you will be, each of you, your own recommendation to the audience when you think about IoT and Edge. So let's start with you, Rob.
Yeah, I'll just be a Debbie Downer here. We've been doing this IoT thing, at least during the hype part of it for the last decade. We got to the mountaintop, and now we're down in Gartner's trough of disillusionment, and people are thinking it didn't work out, and they're trying to figure out what's next. And so in order to pull IoT out of the trough of disillusionment, I think we need to tackle a couple of big headwinds, and these are not new. The biggest head we've always had, it's just too much complexity to build these solutions. Everybody thought the IoT market was going to be this multi-trillion-dollar market. They thought it was going to be like the smartphone app revolution. It's been nothing like it. It's too complex. There's too many domain skills you have to have across too many verticals, to do it. So we got to work on that. We got to suck complexity out of these systems. That's just a generic thing. And then the other big headwind that we really need to go medieval on is security. We're all getting hacked to death out there. And the news is you're seeing stuff every week now. And IoT, the endpoints are clearly the weak link in a lot of these systems. We have all got to really kind of hit the reset button and take security way more seriously.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Now, same question to you, Arlen.
Actually, I agree 100%. It's all about tools on platforms. And I've been in this industry for 43 years, and every morning I get up and say, it can't be this complex to get a piece of data from point A to point B. So simplicity, let's quit trying to eat the elephant. Let's get these projects kicked off, and let's not try to engineer, a complex solution. Let's keep it simple, stupid, and the focus on security. And again, looking at MQTT, we're doing a webinar on security, and we've got to focus on that 100%. So 100% agree.
Excellent. How about you, Jason?
Yeah, it makes sense. A lot of people, let's face it, the reason we don't have interoperability is that they purposely don't have interoperability because they want to lock people in, but that's changing. It used to be that if a startup threatened my way of life as an industrial or whatever, I would just buy them up and kill them off. But with the maker movement, there's so much innovation happening now that there's not enough money in the world to buy up everybody, so you're forced to change. That's why things are changing. But then on top of that, of course, then it's security management. Actually, the next question I think that we were going to talk about if we hadn't run out of time was that most people don't care about security management up front. They care about an app if they're not just tinkering. We've had a lot of people say, ZEDEDA, we do orchestration and security and work with EvoS and LF Edge. And a lot of people we get to early in the process and we're like, I don't get it. That's easy. I don't understand what you do. And then they get past like 10 devices in the field or 50 devices. They're like, holy crap, this is hard. Tell me more. So if you don't solve people, use case, interoperability, you don't have a security problem because you're not doing anything. But that is a massive thing to address now.
Yeah, absolutely. And some players at the same time, for various reasons, don't take this seriously enough. So I'm glad to see that there is growing awareness about the importance of the topic, because we are at risk of killing the golden goose, so to speak, if we don't take this seriously as an industry.
The last thing I'll add, so security is a cost center. That's one of the reasons why people don't want to spend time on it. It costs money and you just want to have the warm fuzzy. Well, some of the new stuff that we're working on is around this notion of data trust and trust fabrics and data confidence. And if you do it right, you basically flip it to where security is now a profit center. That changes the conversation. So stuff to look at going forward, and when you get into data monetization and all those bells and whistles. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even talk about ethical labeling for IoT and Edge products, where little stickers that describe what features are baked in and that kind of stuff. So we'll see if that happens or not. In any case, Jason, Rob, Arlen, thank you so much for the great conversation today. I felt that we could have continued that for literally hours without running out of commentary there. So thank you once again for participating. And thank you all for watching. So once again, I am Frédéric Desbiens from the Eclipse Foundation. This was The Edge of Things. So thank you for attending and see you all next time.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.